So, welcome everyone. I'm joined here by Zeal, Armunn, and Reagan. If you want to introduce yourselves quickly, gentlemen.
Hello, everyone. This is Armunn.
Hi all, Zealberg.
Hello, this is Reagan.
That's a very good mic you've got, Reagan. That actually sounds crisp,
Starting-
man.
It's starting to sound like an alcoholic anonymous meeting, but go ahead.
Well, yeah. Every we start.
Hi, my
everyone
name is
introduce
Regan, and I'm an alcoholic.
Right, so to understand the world stage, we must first understand the egregor, derived from the Greek egregoros, meaning wakeful or watcher. The term historically refers to the angelic beings in the Book of Enoch who bound themselves by mutual oaths. In modern esoteric and hyperstitional thought, an egregor is an autonomous psychic entity, a collective thought form birthed by the focused emotional and spiritual energy of a group. So it is the psychic and astral entity of a group. All members of a group are psychically included in the egregor of the organization to which they belong. An egregor, rather, actually grows by drawing support from the members which constitute it, who in turn, through their repeated actions, vivify it, somehow helping it to maintain its power. If it is sufficiently nourished by such energies, the egregor can take on a life of its own and appear to be an independent personal divinity with a limited power on behalf of its devotees and an unlimited appetite for further devotion. It is understood as an autonomous force birthed by concentrated group consciousness, sustaining itself by feeding on that emotional energy of the group, members of whom undergo ritual, sacrifice, or intense belief-oriented experiences of superconscious alteration. And E. E. Remus stated in his Magician's Dictionary, quote, regarding the egregor, quote, "A second significant reason for insisting on this point is the subject of the egregores. What is an egregor? It is the psychic and astral entity of a group. All members of a group, a family, or a club, a political party, a religion, or even a country are psychically included in the egregor of the organization to which they belong. Of course, each of us belongs to several egregores at once. Therefore, each individual who is involved in a group receives the influences of the egregores. That is the astral counterpart of the group in his psyche. This process is unconscious. The resulting drawbacks are, first, some perturbating psychic influences in the majority of cases, and second, a restriction of inner freedom. It is impossible to free oneself from certain egregores, for example, the egregores of the country you live in. However, we should free ourselves from all egregores which are not essential. An egregor actually grows by drawing support from the members which constitute it, who in turn, through their repeated actions, vivify it, somehow helping it to maintain its power. For a beginner, it is where the danger lies all the more because of the tendency of man to seek protection, the price of which is often a loss of freedom. We should emphasize here that the association with the philosophers of nature does not perform any group ritual in order to reduce the influence of its egregor to a minimum, unquote. So whether it is a religion, a political movement, or a secret society, any group that performs repeated high-intensity rituals, be they literal ceremonies or the figurative rituals of the nightly news, generates an astral counterpart. This entity eventually detaches from its creators, developing its own will and survival instinct. It feeds on the attention and trauma of its members, effectively turning its human hosts into a battery for its continued existence. Today we are going to explore how these invisible giants of the egregores act as the scriptwriters of our reality and the managers of that script, managing the populations through fear, belief, and the calculated theatre of the global stage. So firstly, we'll just go around all of you guys. What are your thoughts regarding egregores? Does that pretty much sum up, would you say?
Well, okay, I'll go first. I agree with that definition in most part. But I disagree with the key point, which is I don't think that egregores, quote unquote, gain a life of their own or a volition of their own. They may resemble. It may seem like it in the same way that it seems like an AI, for example, has intelligence, right, and has volition. But I think that an egregore, likewise an AI, is always dependent on its programming. That can be changed. The programming can be changed by differentiation of the rituals and of the desires, let's say, up to a certain extent. But its perceived autonomy is a programmed autonomy. It cannot deal with the new, in my opinion. And so I think that it's basically a group creation that can regulate the group as long as the group perceives it as an entity, whether consciously or not. But I would just, in that definition, myself, disagree with the autonomy part, or the, gains a life of their own or a volition of their own. I would disagree with that. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Jump in, Zeal.
It's to me this. I hesitate. I agree with Armunn, but I think there's a line, there's a kind of a tagline or a footnote to the agreeing, and I think it's like this thing, for example, with cults, with cult leaders. Like, would say if you have your cult leader, Mr. X. Mr. X is essentially just a guy, right? But his followers have kind of imbued a kind of a charismatic magnetism to him and around him, and they've focused attention on him. And Mr. X, the cult leader, his charismatic magnetic field, if you will, kind of grows, and he stops becoming Mr. X. He becomes Mr. X plus one, and X plus one is the egregor. So he evolves into a sort of an egregoric form in that sense. So maybe this isn't the best example, but what I'm trying to get at is what I'm trying to get at is the viewer, the person who is watching the thing or looking at the thing, that in their mind, essentially, the egregor exists. So, and in a chaos magic kind of way of understanding things, and this is the question, I'll actually throw it out as a question, like, can the thing kind of develop its own being, in a sense, because the consciousness that's focused on it is so intense and so powerful that at some point the line is sort of blurred between what is and what is not. So whether it actually is an entity on its own or is not, like, that line becomes a little bit blurry, because the fact of viewing it, the viewer, the person whose consciousness is viewing it and is being affected by it, they're causing that line to blur a little bit. And that's why I think there's an element of chaos magic afoot between these concepts of is it or is it not, So I think in some...
think it's,
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to answer that. I think it's really what you stated, like the perception, because it would be the same as saying, for example, I'm watching a movie where, I don't know, a guy gets shot, right?
Yeah.
Is the guy really shot? In the perception and in the universe of the movie, yes, he was shot, that character was shot, but the actual person, if that person exists, if it's not, for example, a CGI actor or something like that, was not shot. Nobody was shot, right?
Yeah.
So it's that same difference. Of course, it can be perceived and it can be treated as, but concretely, let's say in the organic sense, I don't think that it can become independent in the same way that an AI can never truly become outside of its programming, creative, have volition and so on. But again, I may be wrong, but this is how I've come to conclude from from my own observation. But I don't know if Reagan has a different or other things to add.
I mean, I was gonna just use the example of Santa Claus as the egregore, and it's only real. It only exists given the belief of the people and the community, and people actually assuming that this thing is, like an entity of its own volition. Once the belief stops, it dies, and that's it. It never existed. So it's, in the sense of AI, that's where it is. I see like man trying to make Santa Claus real, right? Trying to make Pinocchio a real boy, which are all egregores themselves. But I mean, even in the programming itself, it states that if you stop believing in Santa Claus, his sleigh will stop flying and he won't exist anymore. So, I mean, it's almost like a self-tell, right? Because that's every single Santa Claus story, for the last 100 years, which just developed out of all the other ones, Krampus and fairies and Tooth Fairy and bunny rabbits, all this different stuff. So I don't think they take on their own volition. I think it's your false idols in any major religion. It's only given its power, given belief. People have to believe in it for it to actually be real. And it doesn't necessarily make it real. It just makes it real to the person who's experiencing it. But to the actual reality, it's a mirage. It's an illusion. It's it's never actually given its own volition or soul or spirit or consciousness or whatever acting drive of animus that you want to call it,
I'm
Yeah,
going
and
to
this is not. Sorry.
jump in, Armunn, sorry.
No, go ahead, Silas. Sorry.
No, because I'm going to take a contrarian position, but so I'll let you jump in with your thought first, man.
Well, I was just going to say that this is not to say that the importance and the effect of the tool of the egregores is undermined. It is a very prevalent and important unifying collective tool, for sure. But the only thing that I argue is against the idea that it takes its own volition, in the same way that, for example, in my vocabulary, a shadow may seem to be acting independent of the psyche that projects it, but it is not. It is not. It is dependent on the actual stored um, memories and traumas and rejections and etc. of the projector of that same shadow. So, of course, it is experienced by the mind character that doesn't have access to all the material as an independent thing, like, oh, this thing just happened, just emerged. But for a mind character that has some contact, at least with the authority of the psyche, and will know that there was a connection between one and the other, this then is seen for what it is, as a projection of the psyche's contents. So, and I agree also with Reagan when he says that it is entirely based on belief and fed on belief. And as soon as that belief is, that's why it's the same that I advise not to fight with a shadow, because fighting a shadow is making it real, is making it grow in the strength, in the power that it has on the psyche, right? It's because fighting is acknowledgement of a certain type of externalized energy. So, for the shadow to be integrated, it cannot be done through fighting, through conflict. It has to be through, if you want to put it like that, reflection or introspection, or putting things in the right place within the psyche. So likewise, an egregore, if it was created completely artificially, there's no integration there to be had. All that it needs is stop, instead of stop, fill that attention with something more organic and more productive, and it eventually dies off. Yes. Go ahead then, Silas. That was what I was going to say.
That sort of ties in with what the position I was going to take as well, which is effectively I don't actually think the egregor is a projection as such. Of course, the way that we're perceiving reality through that fractured lens of the egregor, if you will, by almost becoming its servant, that itself is a sort of projection of reality, but it's projected from the psychic fracturing, which is the egregor. So the egregor itself is not necessarily external to us. It is the haunt of our thought forms. And so the only way the egregor has any power, the only way any belief really has any power, any hyperstition, anything like that, anything that's fiction that's given the breath of reality by our own psyche, that it must be in our mind functionally autonomous. I'm not saying it is autonomous, it has to be functionally autonomous. And we have to believe it possesses that functional autonomy for the thing to almost for it to even exist, really, right? For it to survive. So I think that functional autonomy is the demarcation point where us, the creators, the unwitting creators and subscribers to this egregoric, whatever it may be, a massified belief system, we eventually become its servant. But it's almost like a compartmentalization of the psyche itself. It's the egregor is the mask. It is the appearance of autonomy. It's the appearance of perhaps even divinity as well, and spirit and all of this, without actually having it. It's us that inject the sort of life into the lie of the egregor. And so that actually, funnily enough, synchronistically, that's my first question. I was going to ask, how do we distinguish between a group's collective will and the emergent personality of the egregor itself? I don't know if we have any other opinions to add to that one there, but that's my position on it.
Yeah, I was going to chime in there that I think the egregor is actually a farmed out, an outsourced aspect of our own consciousness, or even subconscious. Forces that are at work deep within us that we don't quite understand or may not even be aware of in the frontal immediate sense, like of thinking. There may be deep subterranean forces that are outsourced onto this idol, into this vessel, and that vessel then effectively sort of takes on. It appears to take on a life of its own. However, it's a sort of a dissected or a schizoid part of ourselves that's projected. We project onto the egregor, and the form then takes on a life of its own, apparently. But it's actually, what you're looking at is kind of a mirror of maybe the shadow self, for example, if you want to use that kind of pop psychology terminology. But you're looking into your own shadow, and this thing is looking back at you, and you're going, "That's alive, and that's not me." So it's it's not I, it's other than I. But perhaps it's parts of the I, the self, that could never be made whole because they're for whatever reason they there's too much maybe subterranean trauma. It could be like childhood trauma around those feelings. Mm-hmm. So it's to do with fear. It's to do with, like, in a very kind of a Freudian sense, or not even it's the wrong word, but like in a very, like, not to harp on about himself, you know what I mean, on about Epstein, but we were talking about the masks in the dentist room last night, and you know, by the way of creating an egregor, and you have essentially what you have in that news story is it's like performance art. It's performance art in the horror art gallery of Tate Modern, of postmodernism, and of surrealism. So what you've been presented with is actually a surrealist modern art installation, and it's projected. And instead of the art gallery, it's through the new art gallery. For example, is the news media, for example, presenting these images. So you have these array of ceramic faces, human faces, which have been painted and are somewhat peeling and a little bit cracked, and they're obviously old. They're obviously of a certain vintage, which is itself is important in invoking a certain feeling. Like, you know, they're not presented as brand new, you know, made out of plastic or you know, something you can buy off Amazon or whatever. These were made by a hand of an artist, one artist. Like very much the tarot cards were painted by one artist. So you can see the familial connection between all these disparate pieces. And if you look around the room, in the room, at the center of the room is an object which is central to a fear mechanism for most people, the dentist chair, because it means pain. It's an emblematic, totemistic kind of artifact of pain, the manifestation of pain and of fear and of trepidation. And then around this chair, placed in a very, if you look at the photos, these have been placed in a kind of strategic, they haven't just been put up on the wall willy-nilly, they're at various different angles to each other. Some are, for example, over the window are ascending at an angle, going from lower to higher, and the angle meets up to the top window. Then the top two masts are, you know, in a line with each other, and then down the right hand side of the window, again, you have two masts that are descending at a descending angle. And, you know, you can infer from the creation of these masks, like Laurel and Hardy are two of the characters. So this is giving us a peek into the past, whenever that era was, Laurel and Hardy, whenever it was, like, say, the 1940s or whenever it was. So you've got the past, and the past is death, and it's the antique, but it's also the establishment.
Mm-hmm.
It has an old traditional, something that's antecedent to this time. So you're looking back, and in the middle of all this, then you've got the hyper modern artifact sewn into this narrative, the email train. So the emails are coming out about the dentist chair and what was done. I see a comment online somewhere today that the children's teeth were removed so they wouldn't bite. Like, you know, this kind of stuff has been, horror narrative has been, and really what it is a literal, very much a modern art installation, very much like what you'd see in surrealism. It has that kind of typical tonality to it, and this is where I'm coming to this point with this egregoric thing. Like the mask is, like, in modern culture, is in the horror, or it's tied in with the serial killer thing. The image of the mask and the image of the clown, they've been kind of perverted, thwarted symbols of homicide, I think, that are somehow woven down into the Western psyche. And obviously the dentist chair, and there's a medical reference in there as well. It's back to the medical thing, the men in white coats, the establishment, those who we need to keep us alive. And so you've got all these subterranean prompts coming at the viewer. The viewer then, and you've been given the vessel, you've been given a central character in this whole narrative, right? And the viewer is beginning to project these emotions into this character, this empty vessel of this character. And this character then becomes this egregoric form. He has a life of his own. He has his own. We begin to know him, like, so, and understand him, and we can kind of preempt what he's going to do. We're fearful of him, We hate him. We detest him. He disgusts us. But he has his own kind of a life. So I think that's how these egregoric forms are sort of being created and they're being put around us like dolls, like hideous mannequins that are seemingly lifeless. But yet, as we walk around the shadowy house, you walk past these mannequins that are seemingly lifeless, but for some reason they instill with us a deep sense of unease and foreboding and a chill of kind of fear. And you go, well, why should I be? But it's this shadowy form and what we've projected onto it that it sort of takes on its own life.
It's very similar to what children do with shadows and crafting monsters out of it from their own imagination. Even, and then of course that's sort of psychic, unwitting psychic manifestation of their innermost deepest fears. They due to, of course, the intensity of the emotion itself, held regarding that, I guess you would say, a mirror, this egregor, this monster, they in fact, terrify themselves. Or, of course, as well, a monster from the etymology of monstrum, I believe, if I recall correctly, is it wants to be seen, So it's similar to the egregor. The egregor wants to be seen. And similar to what you're saying, Zeal, with the likes of this sort of, I guess you would call it a sort of, it is surreal. It's a sort of dream, right? Interestingly, the German for dream is Traum, or Traum, which is very similar to, of course, the English trauma, which is from the Greek meaning to wound. So it's almost like the egregor itself is a wounding of the fabric of the dream, or the fabric of reality itself. It's like the monster, it wants to be seen. Perhaps it is itself, if one looks at it from a, external to the thought form that is, completely taken over and corralled the minds of the masses that have, subscribed to the egregoric belief system. If one sees it for what it is, if one peers through that sort of perforated veil, so to say, then they will reveal a deeper truth regarding reality from it, right? So it's not just a control mechanism itself. This is the paradox of most things in reality. Most things contain their own opposite, contain their own contrast. So in that sense, it is autonomous, again, functionally autonomous, not actually autonomous, because it's prioritizing its own survival through. Even though, by the way, like what you're saying, it's surreal. It's almost like a fun house.
Yeah.
A sort of sideshow where we're getting lost in these halls of mirrors, these weird, aberrant, twisted forms of reality. So it is a fun house mirror in a sense, right? And in AI is very similar to that. It's so it's literally the perfected reflection of human desires, biases, even in terms of religious egregores, like for example God, or the gods, or what, or the spirits, or poltergeists, or whatever it may be. Those are reflections of man's sort of deep-seated, perhaps even subconsciously, so deep-seated sense regarding his own mortality, and perhaps as well regarding this notion of the traum, meaning the dream, and that of the trauma, the wound, the wound of the fabric in that dream, that which creates the mind characters, the shadows, the masks. It's almost like, in a way, it's almost like it's for I think for many people they need the egregor. I think for many people they just don't. I don't know. Perhaps all that exists behind that mask is a nothingness, and that's a very terrifying prospect. Clearly, these egregores work because they're latching onto something, a vulnerability a susceptibility in the psyche of humanity itself. Yeah, I mean, I think that has to be the most interesting concept to explore with this notion of the egregor. Before I jump on to the next question, do you guys have any points you want to add to that? And we've been joined by Flight of Eros as well.
Well, one of the key components that Zeal brought up of the mechanism of egregores is the contextual story, which, of course, in a wider collective sense, is equivalent to history. Right? And so it is a present force, a present psychological unifying force has to be given a context, whether it is for the perceived quote unquote good or the perceived quote unquote evil. So, for example, there are people that would think, okay, historically, let's say 200, 300 years ago, we lived in very precarious conditions generally. So, what we have now is good enough. It's better than if we were 300 years ago. But that implies that the contextual story of that particular egregore of the now, the egregore of the present civilization, let's call it like that, is not fictitious, right? And once, of course, you start digging, you start seeing discrepancies that lead towards the conclusion that it is fictitious, at least up to a certain point. So there is no guarantee about the contextual stories once we understand that the contextual stories are an integral part of the mechanism of egregores. And this is why the egregores are so prevalent and so used in the collective mechanisms of control, because exactly they provide an entire universe of perception, merely based of perception, to live in, right? And you say, oh, people need the egregore. Yes, they need the egregore in the same way that a movie watcher needs the characters on the screen. If you shut off the screen, what is the movie watcher going to do? He is a movie watcher. He is not he has not established in his own psyche a ground to stand on, right? So he lives through the movies he watches. Therefore, if that movie is to, let's say, either disappear or stop being transmitted or whatever it would be that would affect, that would perturb that movie being projected, of course, that psyche, it would have actually an opportunity. Either it would shatter, or it would finally say, well, I've been watching a movie all this time, right? Now it's the time to figure out where I stand, right? So, I think that was a very, very important part of it that Zeal brought up. Because yes, the Epstein files and so on, of course, we've discussed them more or less in previous conversations, but they do provide a contextual history that spans, into the past. Because of course, although these go, towards decades ago, it still can be, amplified onto the past. And that's why you've had all this buildup of, quote unquote conspiracy theorists always claiming that in the shadows this was happening and that was happening and so on. And of course, they were vindicated now by these files, but they weren't vindicated because they were right. They were vindicated because they were spreading the story that they were given to spread, to create this perception-based reality of these things. And it's the same thing with history, like I said, right? So the civilization itself, of course, each country, as you've stated in the beginning, Silas, but the civilization as a whole, because whether we like it or not, it is a global civilization with minor differences here and there. The civilization itself is an egregor and has that contextual history itself that was spread by the academia, by even movies, even journalists, and so on. Scientists. So everyone contributed, willingly or unwillingly, to the generation not only of the egregor itself, but of the context where the egregor can exist and can live. In the same way that a character can only exist in a movie or in a book or in a work of fiction, the work of fiction has to be there, right? It has to have a context. It has to exist within a certain framework.
I think that is bang on, and there was something I was actually going to mention regarding that, but I was reading something there and it bloody skipped my mind. Yes. So this idea, I think this sort of rounds this thought off everything we've been bringing up, which is why. So if we assume that the egregor is a prison of our own making, right? And of course, the egregor itself etymologically goes back to that egregores, literally the watchers. You find them in the book of Enoch. It also can mean as well to awaken to something, which is interesting, conceptually speaking. So right now, of course, the watcher idea links with perhaps even surveillance, right? We're creating a modern digital surveillance state. If we assume that, that with this modern digital surveillance state, that you might even get bio-digital convergence of sorts, right? A sort of digital tower, if you will, Tower of Babel, if you will. Then if the egregor is our own sort of prison, is a prison, pardon, of our own making, why do we continually create these prisons for ourselves? What is the psychic or psychological reason for that? What is driving us towards imprisoning ourselves, psychically speaking?
Running from responsibility. It's as simple as that. If there are demons out there that want to attack you, then you're not responsible for what happens to you, right? It's much easier to cope with the idea that there are entities or even people that are out there to get you, and that do everything to destroy your life and to whatever, than to I made this to myself. I created these conditions. I actually put myself in this messed up position, which means, of course, that I am the one that can actually remove myself from that messed up position, and so on and so forth. So it is merely a lack of courage, a particular lack of courage regarding one's own power, in my opinion.
Hey, what's up, guys? Just to jump in real quick. Sounds like a great combo. And sorry, I'm working, so I'm kind of in between jobs and stuff like that. But I wanted to just throw this in real quick because Silas, particularly in your response to Zeal, where you guys were talking about the egregor and you're going into like the term monster and what have you, Bataille popped into my head right away. And so here's just a quick quote from The Sacred Conspiracy. And Bataille says, "Man has escaped from his head just as the condemned man has escaped from his prison. He has found beyond himself not God, who is prohibition against crime, but a being who is unaware of prohibition. Beyond what I am, I meet a being who makes me laugh because he is headless. This fills me with dread because he is made of innocence and crime. He holds a steel weapon in his left hand, flames like those of a sacred heart in his right. He is not a man. He is not a god either. He is not me, but he is more than me. His stomach is the labyrinth in which he has lost himself, loses me with him, and in which I discover myself as him. In other words, as a monster. And so I just thought this interesting because when we're talking about the production and participation in an egregore, you brought up the term monster. This popped this into my head. But it's almost as if Bataille is almost taking like a reversal here of even like what you guys are proposing, at least to some degree, because he explicitly says that he has found himself beyond himself, not God. So it's almost like he's saying like the egregore is what is the prohibitive aspect. And then to go beyond the egregore to become headless, right? Because man has escaped from his head, just as the condemned man has escaped from his prison. And when he escapes from his head by becoming headless, what he finds beyond that is not God, right? It's not a man either. It's not like an egregorical conception. And it's nothing that is, and this is evidenced by the fact that it's not operating under the prohibitions given by the egregore, whatever it is in context, right? What we're speaking of, but that it's beyond the prohibitions of the of the specified egregore, which makes it a monster, right? Which makes it this sort of like pure becoming. And so it's pushed beyond the limits of the egregore, and he discovers himself as that monster, right? And of course, he's describing the picture of Asafel, right? It's their picture that they made for the group by the same name, right? The headless being holding the dagger and the heart. And he says that his stomach is the labyrinth in which he has lost himself. So it's this like churning, digestive, extractive means by which one comes into sort of a contact with like a pure reality, like I said, pure becoming. And from that, he realizes that it's a monster which is beyond the egregore, and I am that monster once I go beyond the egregore in itself. So anyways, I thought that was just really, really applicative there. But then just one question, just to throw back out at you guys. When we're speaking of egregores and what have you, how would we distinguish? Would we risk the possibility of like falling into a solipsism? And is that even a bad thing? I mean, does solipsism attain? Is that something we'd want to promote? Or what's the dividing line between, if we say like an egregore is pure projection and it doesn't sort of instantiate in any kind of meaningful way, that it's just pure, let's say, shadow and illusion, it does still have very real effects in the world, at least it appears it does. So then what is going to separate what we assign like being to, right? Or we'll say that this obtains, this instantiates to some degree of being. Does it have to have effects on the world? What would be this definition of being that would make an egregore actually external? I mean, or is it like a gradation? Is it a scale in which, at a certain point you hit a critical mass where then it becomes externalized? Or is the externalization always and forever just a pure illusion?
I'd say
would,
like
okay.
I'll go quick, Armunn. I'd say myself it's within a range. It's in a range rather than after a certain degree, and I think it's like this. What I was saying, there's a blurred line between what is real and what is not real, because this is into this. You're involved in chaos and kind of chaos magic and the creation from chaos. So you can't ever really answer the question. You arrive at a point where truth is meaningless. In this sense, it's actually meaningless to try and establish any truth, because the thing is operating in a whole other kind of a spectrum, and it's I think myself it's sort of beyond. It's in the mysterium, it's within. It's operating between the lines of the rational. and it's operating between, it's in and around the mathematical concerns of reason. So that's why, in a sense, it's so powerful, because it cannot be sort of reasoned out of existence. And I think that is its essential power. It has a stun, and it's a stun factor, and it's so powerful that it actually, on the one hand, it's completely working on consciousness, but on the other side, it's actually working on the fabric of reality as well, on the time, on the space time, you know, the subatomic particular level, like quarks and you know, these it's working on that level as well. It's pulling reality into itself. It's like operating like a black hole. So it's making a reality. You kind of have a microcosmic event of creation, where where the creator pulled the creation out of the Ein Sof. So similarly, and made the concrete nuts and bolts world that we see, including ourselves. So similarly, the space that's made by the egregoric form, it's working in and around this whirlpool of a sort of an energetic black hole that is essentially a nothing, but it starts to pull in sort of particulate energy, raw energy. And at the same time, it's pulling in consciousness, energy, attention, focus from the viewer, from the follower. And by that mechanism, I kind of have the sense that it ends up creating itself. So I think it's actually a very powerful mechanism.
Yeah, answering Flight of Eros question, at least from my perspective, one thing that that is my understanding of it is that egregores function just like you would expect with a computer program, which is a great metaphor in that regard, function on predictability, right? So one stimuli should cause a response within a certain framework, within a certain expected framework. Okay, the person may respond this way or may respond that way or the third way, but it's predicted within a certain array. So that is the projection, let's say, that is imbued onto the egregore. It's like an agreement, in the same way that, for example, we're using the English language to communicate right now, right? So it is expected that, I use a certain type of grammar, because if I jumble up the words in English, you guys won't understand what I'm trying to convey, right? So there is a certain expectation that comes with sharing the agreement of an egregore. So being involved with an egregore, right? So that you can go to, I don't know, a coffee shop and order a coffee, right? You won't go there and order, I don't know, sawdust or something like that, right? That would be, people would stare at you, as if it doesn't compute. This guy is crazy or something. You went into a coffee shop and asked for sawdust, right? Go to your lumber mill, nearest lumber mill or something like that. So this type of thing is how the projection works. It is because everyone imbues onto this seemingly external thing. Call it, I hesitate calling it entity, but whatever. These expectations, these programmed expectations. And this is very important because, to me, one of the greatest problems, let's say psychological problems of mankind, is that we have become completely unable to deal with the unexpected. It's as if the unexpected has become the evil itself, right? The perturbation of perturbation that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a perturbation that will harm us. It may even benefit the individual, but any type of perturbation of a certain routine, and routine is also a word used in computer programming, right? Is seen as an error or something to eliminate, right? So this is the type of projection that I'm talking about. And when I talk about rejection, that forms a shadow projection, forms first a projected shadow that then is reflected back. That reflection back is not solipsistic because everyone is doing the same. You understand? So imagine, you turn mirrors, a collective group of mirrors that are all turned at each other, right? And whatever forms move within are reflected in different angles in all these mirrors and are seen at infinitum, right? In the mirrors themselves, right? That infinite mirror effect. For example, if you put two mirrors in front of each other, whatever image is cast there, it's reflected towards the infinite. Let's say there's copies of the same image. So it's a similar, metaphorically speaking, of course, it's a similar effect where if you are able to, one of those mirrors is able to be unexpected and perhaps turn its gaze or its reflection some other way, it affects the entire stability of that sort of hall of mirrors, right? And this is where we must understand that the power of the individual comes into play and is absolutely essential, because although we are groupal and we are supposed, and yes, it is part of our nature to be in groups and deal in groups and etc., we must understand that first and foremost, each of us is an individual, right? And each individual has to be able, as part of life, has to be able to deal with the unexpected. So if we were to say, or if I was to say, better said, not to include people that may not agree, but if I was to say what propelled the creation of egregores, which are entirely perception based, in my opinion, that was the fear or the rejection of the unexpected as in general. So from the little to the greater, anything unexpected would have to be removed. So that would be my answer. I don't know if I was able to answer your question, but yeah.
I have a few things to mention on that. Do you have anything to add, Reagan, before I jump in?
No, go ahead.
So there's a few things that I want to discuss. Since we brought up Bataille, obviously we're going to have to mention the sort of prey and predator idea as well. There's a guy that I was actually looking into his work. What was his name? Douglas Hofstadter. He has this notion called the strange loop, and it sort of ties in with what Bataille just stated there. But anyway, it got me thinking about even the idea of the mysterious stranger as well, right? As I normally do, and even the concept of strangeness. And it's the egregor itself is a collective. It's a collective thought form. It's not necessarily saying that it's been authored by the intent of those who have subscribed to the collective thought form mindlessly, almost like a blind sort of will. But they are feeding it. They are the sort of ashen fuel of it. So in that way, they have energetically authored it, collectively speaking. but they are not benefiting from it. They believe they are. Of course, this is the whole point of the egregor, but they're not really benefiting from it. So the idea is I think what you were stating is, are we, if we try to escape the egregor, eventually are we going to hit that point where we almost become solipsistic? No, and yes and no, really. And let me sort of preface that. If we understand everything in the world as the object and the tool, the predator and the prey, that which again doesn't, that's not denoting any sort of moral stance on those things, and or you could see it as well as the giver and the receiver, the passive and the active. So the egregor itself is almost a stance where the active force of the predator is seeking to recondition the cognitive landscape of the prey, the tool, the sort of the passive receptor, to more easily, of course, control them and to energetically leech off them, if you will, right? To devour them. So in a sense, I think the quote that you mentioned from Asif Ali, the headless one, from Bataille, he mentions that eventually everyone will reach that person, or reach that thing, that entity. I forget the terminology he uses now, of iron. This thing which is not necessarily strange. It's not strangeness in the Bataillean sense. I think he's talking about sort of thanatos, and of course that iconography that he uses with the individual with fire in the one hand, which is of course passion, ecstasy, and that of course the dagger in the other, which is the iron. That's the thanatos, the destruction, the death, the you could even say the devourment as well, right? So eventually the idea is that you will always hit something which effectively makes you the prey, if you will, and that the predator, or you the receiver, and that entity or thought form or whatever it may be, as the sort of giver, the passive and the active, the positive and the negative. So in a sense, I think in that quote as well, if I recall it, he even mentions that you even get beyond God. This is something that's actually touched upon in Eyes Wide Shut when they talk about we have to be grateful we've survived. We just have to try and survive. So it's this sort of contrast throughout the entire movie between awakening through the discomfort of the winter, the dark night of one's soul, which Bill and of course Alice go through. You could say the anima and the animus, or the will and the soul, or the Geist and the Zeal, however you wanted to describe it. They go through that dark night of the soul, only to realize fundamentally, in terms of the sort of strange loop of reality, that there is no truth, because to pursue truth, as we've discussed previously, and synchronistically we've both have the same allegory here. Pursuing truth is like pursuing the horizon. It's a fleeting moment. You can never truly know life. You can only try and be in sort of rhythmic lockstep with life, right? And as soon as you lose that sort of rhythmic eclipse with life, the moment will go from you. The sensation or experience will go as a sort of fleeting, passing figment. So in that sense, the egregor, in fact, or the mask in civilization, is the greatest mask that humanity has crafted. That itself is almost a way to anchor us, to put onto this mystery, this sort of ineffable, incomprehensible, incommensurate, and invisible mystery, unknowable mystery, a sort of fleshly suit, so that, you know, people can know of it. So in a way, the prey thinks of, once they subscribe to the egregoric mindset or the mass belief system, they believe themselves to be the predator. They believe themselves to be beyond the head, if you will, or beyond that of the general masses, right? Or of the ones who do not subscribe to that mass belief system. However, they don't quite realize that they are merely the grease within the cogs of a machine, right? That they are the sort of the fuel of an Athenor. That they are the fumes within a hyperstitional engine, if you will, right? So, in that sense, it's this constant reality itself is like this. It's a compartmentalized, holarchic layering system, a layer cake, if you will. And if I recall correctly, Bataille, this is my last point, sorry guys, Bataille speaks of imprisonment, which we just brought up, and getting outside of one's head. However, think of it allegorically in this sense as well. Even when the prisoner gets out of prison, he simply goes into another prison. It's just that the bars of that prison, you know, can feel not as constraining or claustrophobic as the bars within the prison that he just left. So in that sense, it's the same notion that everything in reality is fundamentally on this strange loop. It's similar to the liar's paradox, right? For example, if I say this sentence is false, well, of course, if that sentence, if that statement is true, then of course it must be false. And then you get lost in the sort of logic of it all, right? And it just feeds back in on itself. So it's a sort of feedback loop principle.
Well, yeah, just to jump in right here, because
Mm.
I mentioned this the other day in a post, talking about Zeno's paradox, or Zeno's paradoxes, and the Eleatics, because the liar's paradox, as well as Zeno's work, is, you know, it's so incredibly important, I think, to understand these things. And there's a critical error. I mentioned this in the post. I didn't get into it. I've just been so busy lately, and the house has been sick and stuff. But although we're getting over the colds and stuff, so everyone's much better. But the Eleatics made a critical mistake. So Zeno, with his paradox, right, of Achilles and the tortoise, right, the hare, and the paradox of the arrow, right, in flight, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with, right, where you have the.
Yes.
Are you guys familiar with his paradoxes? Just to double check.
I'm familiar with the arrow paradox.
Okay.
But
Well,
not
arrow
the other ones.
paradox will suffice. Yeah. So, just quickly, so the arrow paradox, or we'll just take it into more modern times. Let's say you're sitting at your desk and you got a cup of coffee in front of you, and you reach out to get that cup of coffee. You can divide that motion, or that your perception of that motion to reach out and grab the cup of coffee, into essentially an infinite segmentations. Right? You can go halfway. You can go half of halfway, half of halfway, right? And you can divide everything mathematically into, like, essentially infinite divisions. So what Zeno and the Eleatics then say, siding with Parmenides, is they say, well, then everything is one, everything is being, because our observation of reality shows us that reality isn't real. The material world doesn't have actually any substance to it, right? There's no reality to it. It looks like everything is divided into pieces, but actually that's Maya, that's an illusion. Everything is actually one, right? And you get the Parmenidean one, and then we take off with Plato, and then you get into Neoplatonism, and then we're off to the races, because then that's Christianity, Islam, Judaism. All that comes from these sort of basic understandings, primarily from Plato. But the critical error, at least in my opinion, that the Eleatics make is that they have an a priori assumption that they're making that when they observe reality, and the reality can be divided up into infinite sections, they're assuming that reality is that which is false and not the intellect or the mind. Morris Klein, in his work on mathematics, he's mathematician, one of the best in the 20th century. He brings this up in his book. I forgot the name of it. It's his most famous one, though. You'll have to Google. Mathematics is, because it's just this form of abstraction, that's essentially creating what creates like a web of illusion. The Eleatics essentially had it backwards. It's not that reality is fake and everything is one. It's that the idea that everything is one is the Maya, and what you actually have is infinite difference or variation. Because with the mind, with the mind, with its ability to divide everything up into these infinite patterns, essentially it's a form of illusion that all these things can be isolated and infinitely broken up into pieces. If you take that, you can just collapse all religion or primary forms of Western, at least, religion. I would also include Buddhism in this as well. But you can collapse all that because everybody's making the assumption that what you observe with your senses is Maya. And really, if you reverse it, it's it's the process of dividing up the world. Because when I reach to get the coffee cup, I actually am able to grab it and bring it to my lips. Now, Zeno says that should not be possible because there's an infinite distance between you and the cup, because you can divide that cup into an infinite numerical distance, and you can't cross an infinite distance, but you do it every day when you reach for things and grab it. So they say, okay, well, then reality is not real. It's the reverse. It's that your processing, your breaking up of the reality is what is illusory. So Morris Klein, right, referring back to him, goes on to say, well, mathematics is a useful fiction. It's not, it doesn't have any sort of substantial reality. It's an abstraction that can represent things, and it has utility that we can use it for to cause things to happen in the world, but it's not a reflection of reality. And once you say that, the entire basis of Platonism collapses.
Yeah. It's the problem.
Yeah, I agree.
Jump in, Armunn, sorry.
No, I was just saying that I agree. Yeah, I agree that it is. And in fact, it's not just mathematics, it's any language, whether it is a more functional language like mathematics, or a more communicative and abstract language like the one we're using now. All of them fall in these same categories of illusion, let's say, and that is where the illusion lives. Because one thing is you say the coffee cup, another thing is the actual coffee cup in front of me or in front of you, right? So two completely different things. Which one is real? The one that is real is the one that, of course, you can directly experience, and not the abstract idea that you communicate of the coffee cup. So I was just saying that I agree. Absolutely. Sorry, Silas, go on.
No, absolutely. Well, this ties in as well with even the egregor. The egregor itself is that sort of trancheing up, or that segmentation, that measurement of reality, right? The measurement is the mask. It's like what you're saying, Eros. I totally agree. It's born of the abstraction, right? And of course, man believes himself, I guess, subconsciously, to be God throughout all of these various religions. Through all of this, they sort of make again, going back to Spengler, they make the Faustian bargain, and it's this notion that you even see in the modern managerialist systems, which is that you can, everything becomes massified. That if you can't measure it, you have to bring it down to measurement itself. You even see it with what Gudelian mentioned in his incompleteness theorem regarding mathematics itself. It's not true. It's not true because it is man believing that he himself can almost acquire intellectual ownership over the world itself, right? That he can divide everything up, sort of like a surgeon. And through that division, he can understand it, he can measure it, he can, quantify it in his mind. But like what you're saying, it's totally impossible to do that. Eventually, you're going to destroy yourself, and it's exactly what you see for the egregor and the etymology of it, which is, the more you watch the world and try to change it and divide it and tranche it up to make it perhaps familiar and safe and anthropomorphize it in a way, you actually make it more strange, or you make it more alien, in a sense, to oneself. You in fact become the headless one, in that sense. You destroy it.
Well, here's the thing, though, is that we, at least from my research, you can't escape that process, though, because as Bataille, that's what Bataille is trying to do through his, limit experiences. He's trying to push, right, the himself or a being into a position where you become headless. But what he basically finds out is the only way to do that is through death, right? So that's why then he's very much into sacrifice and go into these like extreme limits, because the issue, what we're ultimately talking about in the production of an egregor or anything else, it's, we're wrestling with representational consciousness, right? We're wrestling with the fact that our mind will automatically, even in dream, right? Our mind automatically presents a hologram, a representation of the world or of our experience. And Bataille
it's the prisoner's
Bataille wants to be. Yeah, exactly. And so that's why Bataille, in one sense, is using the word prisoner, being a prisoner of the mind. But in order to escape that prisoner of the mind, as I think I mentioned in our first talk, whatever it was a couple months ago, you got to go back to that jellyfish state, right? You have to go back to that no direction, which is, which is one of the things that the Buddhists are striving for, is this non-dual state. But what it essentially results in is essentially it's a state of annihilation. And so we're stuck having to always make representations, always in the process of generating a new egregor, always in the process of representing. And like Armunn says, exactly, language, everything falls under this category of representational consciousness. And this is, again, what Kant just pointed out, is that we're trapped within our little box of representation, and you can't get out of it except, a state of annihilation. So then what then becomes the case is that's why I side with more of a Promethean, right, perspective, because if we can't escape representational consciousness, and we're not going to retreat to a monastery, right, and essentially wait to die, then we have two options: to have that representational consciousness be controlled by another, or as Armunn said, we take self-responsibility and we begin to generate through that representational consciousness our own vision, right, or our own hyperstition. Now the problem is, though, there's always a level of risk, because just when you think you're out of, oh, finally I've made it, I'm not deceived anymore, right? You can get very easily caught in a new egregor because of the flux of change throughout the world, because we are emotive beings. And so if you haven't slept for 2 days, your ability to resist, the impressions of an egregor are going to be much more difficult. To be able to construct your own egregor, right, because that's what you're going to be doing all day anyways, becomes much more difficult during intense pain, distraction, whatever it may be. Throw on top of that trauma, early childhood trauma, physical trauma, death, disease, right, panic, anything else that happens, because that causes greater levels of disassociation. And when you have disassociation, that process, that gap of representational consciousness becomes wider, and it becomes much more easily influenced, because now you're being driven by very base biological perturbations, such as like hunger, pain, and fear, right? So the engine of hyperstition, which we all have to engage in, which we're engaging in all the time, that engine you can ramp up through perturbating those base drives in the human being.
That's
Yeah.
sort of a jump in, Armunn.
No, go ahead.
Well, this brings up a point then, right? And I totally agree with what you're saying, Eros. But even the idea that, validating internally, the idea that am I not deceived now? That itself is born of conflict. You're trying to almost do the same thing in a sense, right? Where you're attempting to apply more control points to the environment in which you abide within, to ensure that you're no longer deceived. But in doing so, you end up getting lost in the rabbit holes, as they say. The system itself or the environment becomes more fractious, and so every control point itself consequently increases the fractious nature of the environment, which therefore, and leads to the potential of the unravelment of that environment. And in this case, with deception, it leads one to actually become more deceived, perhaps. So it's almost like we're trapped in a cosmic Chinese finger trap, in a sense. The more you pull in one direction, the more you're actually sort of getting entrapped in the mechanism of it. So I think it's a difficult one, isn't it?
But
Right.
Silas,
Yeah, jump in.
but the idea itself that man should have total control over, reality or the world or whatever you want to call it, is by itself a false abstraction. It is born out of fear. We are not supposed to have control. We are supposed to have interaction, which is different. Of course, we have and we will apply a certain degree of control in, let's say, a healthy balance. And of course, this is very nebulous to state it like this. But past a certain point, that need for control, and control also includes, defining, or like Eros was saying, well, he used the term I don't remember now, which was categorizing or something like that, the world into its pieces, into its patterns. It includes that control. And for example, if you don't know what happened, let's say 1,000 years ago, right? If you don't know for a fact, for certain, and of course you obviously can never truly know, you can only believe. If you have that desire for the control, the predictable element within your reality, you're going to have to construct a story that matches what you desire. And if this becomes collective, of course, it becomes a collective history, a shared history, so on and so forth. So it's the same thing, right? But are you supposed to have control in that, at that full aspect? Are you supposed to know history beyond your own experience? Because you have your history personally, right? And even that can become nebulous through misperception, but you have at least a basis to tell a story of your life, for example, right? But beyond that, you do not. Beyond that, it becomes more and more nebulous, more and more based on belief, right? And this is where I think that the key aspect comes in, which is when we take as real something that we cannot have a direct experience of. And that something that we take as real becomes far more prevalent in our experience than the actual contact and experience within the reality of the individual,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's like the abstract concepts become more divine, if you want to put it that way, than the experience that you have, right? So this is where the I think that the insanity, if if I can put it that way, of mankind comes in. Right? It's when the need for control generates a need for belief, and that need for belief tries to remove the unknown or the unpredictable because it requires that control. And to control something, you have to know it, or at least pretend that you know it. So, yeah.
In terms of power, how do you think that the ruling class, how do you think that they, of course they must be Faustian in a certain sense, right? So they must subscribe to this notion that one can sort of tranche up reality and control it vis-a-vis controlling the vehicles of perception within the masses, meaning the mind, through egregores, through these sorts of invasive thought forms and things such as that, propaganda. If they, of course, they have that belief on a certain level, but do you really see the way that they're acting? Do you think they have the idea within their mind? Perhaps it's even an egregore that controls them. In this sense, do you think that they are attempting to, I don't know, exit from reality, or trying to find an exit from reality, an exit from the strange loop, in a sense? Of course, they're engaged in a similar thing. Anyone that is subscribing to an egregore is, which you've just stated, Armunn, which is that they don't interact with reality. They sort of they analyze it in a very hyper attentive and reductive way. That can, of course, like what we are mentioning with the economic animal that man has become in the modern day. He measures everything. He tries to ascribe a value to everything, and in doing so, in fact, he devalues absolutely everything within his vicinity, and everything becomes this sort of a banal nothingness, right? But how do you guys believe, or what do you guys think the ruling class are thinking? What are they attempting to do? Are they attempting to exit from reality? Are they attempting to simply maintain themselves within reality? Are they attempting to become, I don't know. What do you guys think?
Before I mentioned that a movie watcher needs a movie, and for a movie to exist, you have to have a production company, right? So what they are basically doing is, first they create movie junkies, right? And then they provide the movies that the movie junkies need. And this is their vision of a predictable reality where they can eliminate, and this is basically the let's say paranoia, even the obsession of the call it elites, whatever, is that to be able to eliminate all the unpredictable, this is the goal, you create a completely perception-based alternate reality where everyone, or at the most people that the most individuals that they can, becomes movie junkies, and you are the only production company. So there's not even a competition for this movie or that movie, right? It's like one production company that, yeah, does westerns, does sci-fi, does religious movies, does all kinds of movies, but it's one production company when you go high enough in the structure of the corporation, let's say. And so this is what I think, answering your question, they're trying to do. It's not an escape from reality. In a sense, I think that Flight of Eros described how they feel about escaping reality. They know they can't escape. They know there is no escape. But their escape, in that sense, is to create an alternate reality that they can control. Right? And of course, this, in my opinion, is an illusion. And at the end of the day, although it works at a mass level, it does not work in the minute detail of organic life. Right? Life persists regardless of perception. Right? Life has its own way of doing things and going about, let's say, regardless of perception itself. Right? And it is then man that has to often enter into, I would say, an organic cognitive dissonance between the perceived and the experienced. Right? So that is the, in my opinion, how they think, or how they, um, you know, go about doing it. Their end goal, I think they understood that actual exit or actual escape is impossible. Although I think they do feel trapped, and so in that sense, yes, they are very agnostic. But their solution is the creation of an alternate reality for mankind that is entirely perception based, by creating movie junkies, and they're the only production corporation around.
Yeah, I personally think that they basically come to the conclusion that if this is how reality works, then we're going to be the ones to run it, right? If it's either annihilation on one hand, or you're in the throes of representational consciousness on another hand, then we're going to play the representational consciousness game, and we're not going to go after the monasteries, and we are going to be top dog. It's predator-prey relationships. It's sort of this Darwinian evolutionary trajectory. Because of the situation we're in, we obviously have, which I'm fully convinced that they're fully aware of, and they have, I think, very accurate timescales for cyclical cataclysms that sort of wipe the slate clean, at least for a certain degree, kind of like clear off the petri dish and start over. And they're determined to get through that process, be top dogs after that process, and continue to push forward. So in that sense, it's very reptilian, right? It's in a sense, it's very much survive, conquer, survival of the fittest, might makes right, right? If I have the money and the power to dominate you, I will, right? And if I have the power to deceive you, I will. And the issue is that it's not just like the law of the jungle, right? Where it's like once the tiger is fed, for the most part, it's not going to seek to kill anything else. Humans have this sort of hyper death drive situation going where we take that representational consciousness, and because we can see the horizon, right? Being these vertical upright beings, we always have a horizon before us. Like the pig and most four-legged animals, they run primarily on their olfactory senses, right? It's mostly by smell, because they're following like scent trails as it mixes and mingles amongst different grasses, and in the environment that they're in, we're primarily vision based, right? Even Nick Land says this on the back of his book, Fang Numina, right? On the back, it's his quote from his essay Meltdown, his most famous essay, and I forgot exactly what it is, but it's like, reality is he says reality is a primarily vision based, right? Then he goes on for the rest of the quote, and he says, what is playing you make it to level 2? So he's talking about this AI egregor, right? This representational consciousness, this Geist that is playing mankind, and it's trying to evolve to the next level, to level 2. And then Nick Land is saying, look, garbage time is going to run out, where we only have so much time on the planet before we pollute ourselves to death or another cataclysm comes. And that's a timer. And the Geist that is playing us, he's, anthropomorphizing this egregor, this massive egregor of Geist. And he's saying, can what is playing you make it to level 2? But he indicates there that our reality as humans is primarily vision based. So we have this extended horizon, and this sort of creates this reflective concept in our minds that there's something beyond that horizon, right? Like you get to the mountain peak and you can see farther out, and let's go over there. And that creates this like exploratory curiosity drive in humans. And when you combine that in a predatory environment with limited resources, right, and extreme intelligence, you get the elite. Someone is going to have more power, more ability to enact their will on the world, and they're just going to say, "Hey, might makes right," and we're just going to dose you guys all with vaccines, and you're stupid, and you're going to take them, and we're going to wipe out 2/3 of the Earth's population, and we're going to observe everybody. We're going to put up all these satellites, and there's nothing you can do about it because everyone else chose to hide from reality. Everyone else chose to hide in their abstractions, hide in ideas about God and justice and truth and all these other things. And because you all fell for that, it was survival of the fittest. We didn't fall for that, so we're on top. And I think they feel completely justified in that position. And they're sort of, I think, like on a bloodlust now, like sharks in the water, where they've realized throughout history, at least from the last cataclysm, they've realized what power Geist is able to produce in the material world, and they're drunk on it now. And they're really shooting for that horizon as quick as they can before, I don't know, we get pole shift or something else.
That is, I mean, you see it in their writings as well. A lot of the I won't actually mention them here because this is going up to YouTube, but they mention that might equals right. They even talk about what they have done is evil. But they need to continue. It's a sort of sunk cost fallacy. They need to continue with what they're doing, the trajectory of travel, of their behavior and all of that, so that in the end, the sort of dawn that will approach of the new world, the new order of the ages, it will be all worth it in the end, because of course, as you're mentioning, and they even use that term as well, might equals right. So, yeah, in that sense, it's a very simplistic mindset, perhaps, right? Of course, perhaps they even stumbled upon these ideas thousands and thousands of years ago, or who knows how long ago, through a sort of understanding, an observational understanding of the world itself, right? They dissected it, they understood it. Of course, that informed their understanding of themselves, which itself permitted them to begin to create ideas, conceptions, and perhaps axioms of control of the psyche itself. This sort of Gnostic, hermetic notion of know thyself. So in that way, they, as Plato mentions, they are philosopher kings. They understand the mind because they want to understand the mind so that they can be an interspecies predator, so that they can efficiently, attain maximum efficiency in that regard, like what you're saying as well. And Armunn also mentioned, it appears that they're wanting to create a virtual reality something in which they can control. They realize there's no escape. But if they can establish an even greater, more impenetrable mask, one that's of course imperceptible to those inside that vivarium, that mask, that virtual reality, then of course they can perpetuate their position, and in totality, as opposed to civilization. I mean, civilization is a mask of barbarism. That's what I think the Epstein scandal, or the narrative, was alluding to. It's this idea that we no longer have these notions in the West that we are somehow perhaps morally dominant, or we have the moral high ground. I mean, everything in the West right now, I can assume that all you guys have a similar sort of a perception of it, is that everything we do in the West, all of the wokeism, even what we see on the right wing as well, all of it is based around that we are either morally superior, intellectually superior, in some way, or that of course we are not animalistic. We have no animalistic drives, and that has been totally annihilated with this narrative. But of course, this is leading to you have to burn the old world before you can recreate the new from the ashes, right? Like the phoenix from the ashes, or of course, if you want to be the master over the ruins. So yeah, but I don't know if does anyone have anything else to mention upon that, Zeal or Reagan, these ideas.
There's plenty of things to mention, the whole concept of just the egregore itself. It's hard to even differentiate that everything is an egregore. If you break it into its most simplest forms, every single thought or idea that was ever had and formed into a material substance is essentially an egregore. I think the differential that's required is to separate, I guess it would be like the distance and the time between it. Because when you have something actually materialize, like you can still call it an egregore, as it was a collection of thoughts and ideas that came into fruition and created a thing. Therefore, that's why you have like even an illusionary egregore has actual effects on what is considered, objective reality. I think a lot of it's really twisted up, and it's even more so twisted just because we have the written language. It's not even our own, and all these other issues and barriers that come about from it. But yeah, I mean, the whole thing with even the word egregore, like, man, that the word itself just is so embedded into everything. And what I mean by that, I think everybody touched on a topic at one point or another, but like, to me, I mean, any story is an egregore, right? But you have particular ones that really key in on these words in particular. So like egregore, for instance, the first time I ever heard of it, and still to this day, when I hear that word, I think of Winnie the Pooh's companion, Eeyore. Eeyore the egregore. He's the donkey or the ass or the mule or whatever you want to call him, which is the same as in like Shrek, right? Another egregore with the donkey. And we kept talking about mass. Well, any association with the mass has to do with like headless and horsemen and faceless and Janus and all these different things. Well, when it comes to the mass, the one that I'm always going to think of first, and the one that's in all of the other egregores to some extent, is the mask is typically associated with Loki. Now, of course, that's like a Norse mythological god, but also just that word low key is, lower densities, the lower realms, as opposed to Eeyore, or Shrek's buddy, the donkey, which is like the dawn key, right? As opposed to the low key. It's kind of like masking and unmasking of the key, in a sense. But yeah, I mean, it's, even while you guys were talking too, approaching that place you can't actually approach. You know, it's this fictional line. In mathematics, they're called asymptotes. Asymptotes are imaginary lines on the graph to which no other line can touch or cross at infinitum. It can approach it at infinitum, but it can never touch it or cross it. And that, I think I got a good slide for that one, but there's like, you have in The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy's companion is Toto, right? To me, that's just like a secret way of putting in there the asymptote. It's also a shortened form of totem, right? Like the totem pole of the Native Americans, or many other Egyptians had totem poles. But it's that tote, you know, and it's tote is like also a word for box or cube, package, etc. You know, a tote. So asymptote essentially means the opposing thing to that. So you might as well say the tesseract, which is a box that's constantly folding in on itself in a 5-dimensional space that is well beyond our comprehension, being in the 3D.
It's just really quickly, that's a superb point. Even the idea of Toto is it's effectively the esoteric sun. It's Sirius, Canis Major, it's the brightest star in Canis Major. Toto also you find in Latin is where we get our term total from. So the totality of some, you know, the everything. I put some notes together a wee while back on the Wizard of Oz, and even the idea of the in the Swahili language, interestingly, which is a language in southern Africa, Toto actually means child or little one. And you brought up the donkey, and that's also very interesting. The donkey is eventually when the Hittites came into Egypt, not the Hittites, the my god, the Hyksos. My god, my mind is gone. The Hyksos, the Shepherd Kings, of course, the Proto-Israelites, when they came in to northern Egypt, set up, of course, their capital city of Avaris, which we, of course, now associate with greed. If you're avaricious, or you have avarice, you're greedy. But they syncretized Set. That was the main deity they worshipped, the god of necessary chaos and darkness, and they associated his sort of hybrid animal with that of the donkey. In fact, the oldest Christian iconography, the Alexandromenos graffiti, which depicts Christ on the cross, actually depicts Christ with a donkey's head. And there was a belief as well, stemming from the sack of Jerusalem in 70 AD, that when they went into the temple, they actually found in the Holy of Holies, the Kodesh Kodashim, a golden donkey statue, right? I believe even a priest called Zachariah mentions this as well. But it's the reason they have the donkey there is because the donkey in Hebrew is gamor. However, that actually shares a root with the word for materialism, or material and matter, as in, you know, sort of scientific matter in terms of physics, which is Homer. So Homer and Homer. So this is the reason they use the donkey is literally the lower cell for the animalistic nature. It's also seen as stubborn and stupid, but you see in the likes of you even see this with Apuleius's golden ass, the golden ass, which was a piece of writing in what was it, the 2nd century AD or something, I believe. But it discusses that same idea where there's this transformation into a donkey which represents the initiate being sort of overcome by their lower nature and then fundamentally being redeemed. It's the same idea you see in Epstein's case, right? And even effectively every mystery school, right? They go through that initiation, which is the self sacrifice, the death of their old self. And yeah, I mean, it's, you see it with the Osiris myth of rebirth as well. I believe even Giordano Bruno, he had some sort of commentary, if I recall correctly, on Balaam's talking donkey, right, from the Old Testament. A very strange story in that, but he likened it mystically to the holy fool, and even representing things like the coincidentia oppositorum, right, the merging of the animalistic will with the, that of the soul, like what you were mentioning, the asymptote. Oh, he's heading out. Well, we'll ask another question. Do you want to jump in, Armunn?
No, I was just going to say that he wasn't impressed by your response.
No. I had to read that there. He's like, I'm heading to work. I'm like, oh God, he's left. I've interjected and pissed him off. Fortunately, no, we've escaped that one. So on this idea of feeding, which we were sort of hinting at there with the predator and prey linked in with the egregor. So the egregor is associated with sort of this control, this need to control both life and time, vis-a-vis controlling all of the potential unpredictable elements within the environment, which is of course other human beings, other sentient creatures. And like what we were mentioning in the beginning with E. Ramos's the Magician's Dictionary's quote regarding egregores, that they grow by drawing support through repeated actions, and you hinted at this as well, Zeal. Interestingly, by the way, on the dentist thing, the Hebrew term for tooth is shein, and shein, funnily enough, shares the same root as the Hebrew word for repeat, or to repeat, which is interesting, bit of trivia there. But so in the context of the world that we're in right now, the informational age, attention branding is something that's becoming the sort of primary nourishment for this system, right? And we're moving away from a system of pure materialism and material production to that of production of attention, and the collation and the corralment of attention through hyper objects, and of course the scrying mirrors that we walk around with. So how has the speed of information changed the incubation period of the modern egregor compared to the slow burning rituals of the past? Does anyone have any opinions upon that? Can you speak to that idea?
Well, it may tie in a little bit with the previous question you asked, like why are they moving like the way they're moving? And I think because of the speed of the technology is a bit of a double-edged sword. Like it can work in our favor, but it can work against them, but it also could work in their favor. So it's like they have to move quickly to contain it. And you could probably link the idea into this idea of excess. There's an excess of an attention, an excess of leisure time, an excess of curiosity, and also an excess of information or possibilities to get information. So all of this affects power. And also it affords opportunity to power to just basically smoke bomb the entire population and stun them, and confuse them and corral them and waylay them and whatnot. So I think that factor, that multiplicity of availability of information is kind of has influenced the way things are the way the play is going, like, you know. And I think it's actually it's one of the main reasons behind everything that's happening is technology, is the type of the way we're at surfing this wave of technology influences all hands, and including the power structure themselves, because they have to stay ahead of it. And yeah, otherwise it would lead to their downfall, really, because, you know, it's again that Bataille notion, like the system generates an excess which eventually can lead to the downfall of the system itself. This kind of economic kind of idea, like, and similarly, that's what's happening now. I think we mentioned it last night, that this idea that all this propaganda and kind of informational manipulation of mass consciousness by the egregoric center of them, or the power structure, or if you want to call them the elite, all of that is designed to hoover up the excess of sort of mass curiosity and mass dissent and the mass political capacity of people, and the sort of political economy of you know, contrarian, to use your word earlier on, there are kind of dissent, really. So, but like, in summary, like, all of it is informed by where we are in technology, you know, because it's, you know, and it's to do with time as well. You know, the scale now is measured, everything is happening a lot more quickly, and at the same time, again, as you mentioned last night, Silas, it's happening quickly, but at the same time, nothing at all is happening, really. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, down at the farm, things are the way they've always been, and they're becoming more static and more stale. And whereas around you, you've got this kind of egregoric whirlwind where we've projected the currency of our will into that whirlwind, that to convince ourselves that things are happening, and there's so much happening, but really, you know, it's a kind of a facade.
This ties into another thing. Oh, jump in, Eros.
Yeah, so, sorry, just to be real quick, because I just wanted to bounce off of Zeal's point there. Great point, talking about time as well. I mean, technology is definitely accelerating this, and we know this is very obvious, right? Through hyperconnection with the internet, instant news feeds. That's definitely accelerating the process because of our access to information. So the production of egregores are extremely rapid because of that diffusion of information and access to it. But I think what the elites, one of their primary goals here, is they need a temporal anchor point, if you will, because I think Zeal's absolutely right that it's a highly combustible time right now. It's a critical juncture, because while yes, the economies are doing bad, you know, we're about to go to war with Iran. All this stuff is developing, but we're not so hard up for it yet that my only concentration right now is like, where can I get another piece of bread? I mean, you know, we're sitting here talking, so we're not that hard up yet. So it's a critical time. And I think that they're trying to establish a temporal anchor point, like, in the future. So I think that's why there's been such a big push on basically an apocalyptic view on things. Now, this isn't to negate like these cataclysms that come in cycles, but I think what they're doing is using that network, and then through obviously pumping up more of the conservative Abrahamic religions, right, which obviously has an apocalyptic view, but they need all of that egregoric potential to be focused into the future, so that everybody is, and they've trained us since COVID, right, for the next disaster, right? There's just constant,
Yeah.
every week, everyone is just numb to the disaster. So what this does is this orients everybody's hyperstitional perspective into a future anchor point, right? Whether it's the return of Christ, the rise of the Antichrist, whatever it
Yeah.
is. And so they're building roadblocks in the world. Look, this is coming. I mean, aliens, right? Comets. The sun's about to
Yeah.
go, right? So what they're doing now they're ensuring as much as they can that this happens. And I really do think that there is a cycle that is coming up real soon for these global sort of resets. But it's not going to blindside us. They don't want it to blindside us because they want us
They're
focusing into the
preempting it.
future. Because
Yeah.
yes, because
follow the
then what they
narrative.
can do is as they construct the egregores that they're constructing through narrative, it has an anchor point. It has a strange attractor, like a spider's web. It's going to
Yeah.
rotate around the central point, right? So
Yeah.
that's why we've seen in the last 3 to 4 years, everything in the conspiratorial world before 2020 was like hush hush, right? And now you
Yeah.
can't everyone's feed is just flushed with it because the
Yeah.
conspiratorial, right? That whole milieu of discussion is not just like what has happened in the past that's a conspiracy, but what are the elite doing now and what's going to happen in the future. And I don't think that
But
that's inherently bad or like acidic if one is balanced in their mind, but if they're weaving the narratives
yes,
both
which they
in
are.
the mainstream, exactly, both in the mainstream news, but also in the alternative and in the podcast world as well
Yeah.
now, right? They've gotten their
Yes,
fingers into
absolutely.
that. You see, so what they're primary concerned is while we dress everything up and put everything in its place and start this war and move this here and buy silver and put it over here, while they're getting everything prepared, let's anchor everybody into an apocalyptic future point that they can focus on so we can generate the egregore for that apocalyptic point.
Yeah. And tying the apocalyptic point, the penultimate moment, like what is the final breaking point of the masses before they say, right, we want World War III, or we want the tower to topple, or okay, we're ready to hit the red button right now. And like one of those kinds of things will be this is the egregore, this is the invisible specter phantom around this ongoing narrative with Epstein, Trump, the royal family. It's pedophilia. It's the final sacred breaking of the innocence of childhood. Once that's broken, to me, that's the penultimate.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's what they're advancing, subconscious. They're advancing that narrative into the mass consciousness to kind of generate
That
a
is a
hysteria.
cross-cultural taboo, isn't it? Across every single culture. I don't know a culture where that's normalized. Perhaps we could think back to the ancient pederasty of Greece, but apart from that, there's really not been another culture where that's been normalized on a societal scale.
Don't forget,
And
they're
it's
clever
kind of
enough to have presided over a few completely broken cultures and broken people and imploded peoples. Be it, you're talking about, the native populations in Canada, etc. Certain communities here in Ireland over time. And one of the symptoms of the implosion is the abuse of children, addiction, these kinds of, absolutely destructive, self-destructive behavior. So I think myself that they themselves only are kind of advancing that because they want to sort of, it's a psychological nuclear weapon. That's something you detonate inside in the society's mind, and you destroy its mind, you destroy its selfhood.
You're eating the potential of the future effectively. That's what they're doing when they do that. So they're actually traumatizing and destroying the
exactly.
future.
And you've smashed the moral code, really, because like what more sacred thing? What is the worst thing you can kind of think of? And that's it. That's kind of the worst thing.
What's the point of fighting a war as well, right? I mean, what are you protecting? If you're destroying those, look at the way that women are even treated in our modern society. They're effectively harlotry is effectively
Promoted.
exemplified and promoted. So
Yeah.
what are you defending? Why would you go to war? I
But
feel
the
it
thing is,
myself.
this is what I think they're going to do, man. They're going to push all this stuff until people say, "I've had enough." And at the point that someone says, "I've had enough," at that point you can hand them a rifle, and they're ready to fucking start. They're ready to cut loose. Enough of this shit. Like this whole thing has to come down now, and like, you know, the whole castle has to get leveled. And like, if you were right in what you've been saying all along, Silas, that the focus ultimately will be the destruction of society. That the ultimate inversion, the ultimate occult inversion would be that the people themselves will destroy their own society.
Yeah,
That the power structure won't have to do anything at all. They can sit back.
the Zohar calls it the war of all against all. I forget the Hebrew.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
what it translates as. And
yeah.
basically when these seven, it says that human history goes in 6 steps of 7,000 years, right? But six millennia, and on the sixth millennium, right? I guess in our view it'd be the fifth millennium, but the year 6,000, that is the beginning of the tikkun, right? But within that there's basically tribulations gone wild. Like what you're saying, Eros, they put signs out there because they're wanting people to almost energetically be. Of course, this is unwitting, subconscious to the subscriber of the egregor, or the hyperstition. But they are their energy is being channeled to this future time period because again, all egregors must have a beginning and an end. This is what you see with the IAO, right? Or the Ya, the idea, which is the thought form, the egregor, which is taken up by the society en masse, and that becomes a sort of perceptual whirlwind. This is why, by the way, they worship Baal, Moloch, Yahweh, storm and war deities, because the storm itself is the circularization of time, where effectively what you're doing is you're creating loops upon loops upon loops in a general direction from the beginning to the end, the alpha and the omega, right? So it's very similar to the Sator square, but there's something else I was going to mention. It's totally slipped my mind, but yeah, basically, yeah, that's
Well,
that. Yeah.
if you remember, Silas, we were speaking, I think, the other week, later in the evening, and kind of like one of the final points I was making was that once they pulled his card, like Zeal says, like this nuke that they drop, in terms of like the really pulling back some of the curtains on the corruption of the society, um, that is sort of pushing people towards that limit experience, right? That's pushing people's like, no, like everybody thought that this was maybe like one or two weirdos here and there, but this is actually like at the very basis of the society in terms of its the people on the internal, the biggest companies within these the governments and what have you. But once they pull that, they sort of use that, they're cashing in that blackmail. That means something big is coming,
Exactly.
right? It's like a spell, and they're like casting a spell, and they finally finish it. They seal off that spell and then launch it, put it out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now that they've launched it, it hits. And I think Zeal's absolutely correct. I mean, like I'll see like in comments on, because it's just all over the place. Everybody's talking about it, right? And I'll see comments and videos or on forums or like on Reddit and stuff. People like top 3 comments, right? All these thumbs up and what have you. People are literally just saying, "Man, just fucking end it." Like
Yeah.
people are literally expressing like, "I give up." I'm these are literal phrases I'm seeing, like burn it all down, send the meteor, like
Yeah.
the entire world needs to go. That's the position that people are at, because it's only taken 6 years and everybody is just completely exhausted. Just completely exhausted, and that's what they've been doing. It's a millstone, right?
Yeah.
And they're just grinding and grinding and grinding, and they're pushing everyone's buttons. Everybody was already destabilized because they're playing that pendulum swing of, boom and bust, and they take us through these things. And we had this huge liberal period, after 9/11 through Obama and what have you. And we got the same reaction for that. Everybody wanted to vote for Trump. Everybody wanted to go conservative and MAGA, at least here in the U.S. And the state I'm from, it's super MAGA state, right? And they were all into it, flags everywhere, and it was just this huge thing, because that's that rebound that you get back from that hyper liberal state. So now when you take us to these, or reveal these sort of these depths of excess, right? Almost this like Bataillean excess.
Yeah.
And then it pushes people towards that, like Reagan said, that asymptote. That's perfect illustration. It pushes them to that edge of breaking, and they're looking for that rubber band snapback, I would say, because the liberal, the true, like, communist, liberal, Marxist is gonna be like, I want to lay on the beach all day and smoke pot, man. Like I'm gonna grow my hair out. I'm just gonna lay here. I'm just gonna chill. I'm not gonna do anything. But the elite very much want, and we're the tools in their hands. So in order to concentrate power, you have to conserve it into a specific point. So you need them to rally around specific issues. And when we'll see what happens if they try to play a narrative that Trump was really in all this stuff with Epstein as well, right? But if they do end up pushing that narrative really heavy, then even their Messiah has now failed them.
Well, it's
right. At least here in the States,
It's even in the name Trump, the Trump, So it's it's the literal Trump card. It's that which you don't expect. You see this. Of course, this tells you as well. It's a narrative, because you have charactonyms. You literally have the names of these characters reflecting what they're going to do. I mean, that's why I put in my first book that Trump was going to be a sort of Caesar figure, where he was going to raise people up. Of course, you raise them up, you raise them up, and then you take the wind out the sails, right? Because, like what you're saying, that allows the sort of energetic, the sort of energetic rebound effect to permit you to push them in that other direction that you desired, right? So it's almost like it's almost like judo. You're using their momentum against them, their psychic momentum in this sense. I mean, I totally agree with what you're saying. And do you not think as well that, so throughout every single civilization, again, civilizations are basically just masks for our own barbarity, and of course, on a more mechanical level, they are stringent systems of the hyper domestication of humanity over long periods of time, right? So civilization itself will outlive empires or societies, but the civilization itself, it's pointing to these greater epochs. So Western civilization, for example, can be encompassed by the Spanish Empire, the Dutch Empire, the British Empire, the American Empire, so on and so forth, right? So, and then on an even grander scale, you have these world ages, like what I was saying of those human history being 7,000 years, and then you have a complete and utter annihilation. But at every point of this decline of civilization, you have cognitive exhaustion. Now, why would that be the thing that destroys the civilization? Because the civilization itself is an abstraction. And what you find is at the end of the civilizational cycle, or the imperial cycle, or whatever, is that the thought form, the idea, the egregor, if you will, the hyperstition that was fueling that source of that fire of the empire, of the civilization, it begins to peter out, and it begins to peter out because the fuel of that fire it sort of drifts towards other abstractions. That's what you see in our civilization, for example. Even this idea of liberal and MAGA, or Democrat and Republican, those things are actually dividing the civilizational energy up. It's tranching up. It's almost in a way sort of similar to the arrow paradox, right? because you tranche it up so much, it actually induces greater and greater inertia at every single instance of that frame. So, see, this is the way they it's a sort of catch-22, right? They have to control society through the tranching of it up into its various fault lines, thus establishing greater points of manipulation and control. But the more points you put into that system, the more fault lines you can manipulate and control it, but and induce inertia into the system, but you actually also induce more fractures, and eventually it leads to its unravelment. And not just its unraveling, but it actually leads as well to a total inertia of the culture, and basically a petering out of the fire, like what we're seeing right now, right? So they have to preempt that and control it. They have to have an artificial collapse of the house of cards, because if they don't, obviously they'll completely lose their position. They'll be basically swinging from lampposts, effectively, right? So they have to artificially collapse these civilizational systems, and then, of course, begin a new one. Usually, by the way, see, once they collapse this civilization, the barbarians that are on the hinterland are actually inside the civilization at the point of collapse. They will actually arm them and basically bolster them through propaganda, through almost an egregoric flame itself, to carry on that torch by destroying the old civilization. You saw that with Rome, for example, with the Germanic and Celtic, and arguably even the Scythian or Sarmatian quote, quote, barbarians, right? They took over Rome. A similar thing will occur in the West. Just we of course will be taken over by sort of a multicultural patchwork of different tribes and such, right? It'll be a complete and utter maelstrom. But it's the same formula that's utilized. But I think you're right, Eros. I think there's something big coming up, and it happens probably every like 7,000 years, 6,000, 7,000 years. There's like perhaps a geophysical, or even you could say natural, or a far more sort of external or non-man-made, non-controllable by man himself, geophysical event that perhaps begins the process yet again of this sort of the solar excess within the system, and that has to be finitely devoured and consumed until another geophysical reset. And then, of course, you'll have grand geophysical resets themselves, which probably occur every 26,000 years, in line with the precessional year. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's like that. It's like this oscillation that increases over time in terms of its total output, where you have in terms of its societal construction, you have these like the sine wave of these deterritorialization and reterritorialization. So it's like you go into times of where things are taken in a more liberal direction, which will cause this like corrosive effect on the society as a whole, because it's becoming fragmented, because like a rhizome, it's spreading like a network, and new areas are being pushed into new ways of thinking, new ways of behavior, new ideas are coming up, and these all are generating information, right? Data to be collected on new perspective, new ways of doing things. But when the society becomes too liberal, it becomes unstable. And then so what you need is you need to induce levels of traumatic perturbation on the society to get them to focus back into like a centralized trunk, right? Using sort of an arborist analogy here, like dealing with plants. You need a centralization of that thought the power, of the energy, all into a centralized position. And then once you achieve the goal, get through that, birth canal into a new era, and which is usually, defined by the development of new technologies, right? When we hit these sort of like choke points of society where new technology comes online, and then once that new technology comes online, it usually allows for greater wealth production, and then from there you get into a more liberal society, and then liberal society allows for even greater production, and then you have to concentrate it again, usually through trauma, war, what have you, some kind of external threat, pass through that birth canal, and then in that process of war, that's when most of the new discoveries are done, or at least implemented in terms of like warfare and forms of technology. And so that breathing cycle continues, but it's not a static cycle. It's an accelerative cycle as we progress throughout the aeons, right? As we go through. So like I always mention, right? Printing press, right? Just the bomb is dropped when that printing press comes online, and then you just have this massive deterritorialization. All the fencing that's been placed in on medieval Europe just gets completely blown away, because now everybody can interpret the Bible as they see fit. So there is a million perspectives now, right? And then the work is done to then reconcentrate that effort, and then it expands, concentrate, and expand. And so, which is just the cycles that you see throughout nature as well. So I think the elite are very much aware of the realm in which they're in, because it's essentially observing how reality works and then copying the same procedures,
Yeah.
right? And you could see the same thing just in terms of physics as well. Like you can have, like if you pulse energy into like some kind of object, if you take like a glass ball, right, and you pulse vibratory waves, right, like sound waves into it,
Mhm.
right? If it doesn't have any way to dampen that energy, the oscillation of the vibratory states back and forth causes it to break eventually, right? So this is just how the physical universe in which we inhabit works. But they take those same principles that are from physics and they apply it on a sociological level, and it works the same, right? So where they pulse in these perturbative, vibrational, traumatic, whatever it may be, and that causes this oscillation, and we get to this breaking point. But instead of the whole thing just completely breaking, and the society, it's just a pure negretto, right, where the society just dissolves into pure barbarism, and they lose all control of it. Before they get there, they redirect that power into a new unit, and it's usually redirected towards war, right?
Through the
And then,
albedo, the light. Yeah, the
yep,
light guides it. Yeah. Hmm.
yeah, and then that is usually a mass depopulation for the
Hmm.
countries involved,
Yep.
right? And then they start it back up again. So what we have is there is some elite faction of beings high up that understand these principles to a T,
Oh yeah.
and they not only understand them, they know how and when. Because what we're essentially talking about is what's called Aionic magic.
Yeah.
It is an Aionic sorcery where they're not concerned about so much, you know, um, doing whatever particular localized sorcery so that like they can cast a curse on their neighbor's cows, right, or something along those lines. They are working on sorcery on the levels of the Aeon, right? Where as the Aeon progresses and we go through these cycles of destruction, how to maximize extraction of information and wealth, right, and resources,
Mhm.
and how to run and follow that boom and bust, right, cycle. And they're pretty damn good at it, because I mean, their timing is impeccable, right? Because you don't just have to time things in terms of like markets, you have to time things in terms of like the psychological dispositions of a people. Like it's not the right time to introduce like Obamacare, or it's not the right time to have a 9/11 or that kind of event at certain times. Like Obamacare wouldn't maybe fly in the 50s or the 1850s or 19. You have to time things because the people's psychological dispositions, their perceptions, the egregore on which they are running has to be correct to be able to receive the implementations that you're bringing in, right? So the timing is just absolutely precise, and so we're definitely up against a lot here because they're working on these cycles, which is also why they seem to be in a rush. Everything seems to be very timed, right? In order, and we're seeing it now because it's so much in the open. I think this is how it's been for a long time. It's just we've been distracted with TV, and they've been able to hide things very well and make things look like an accident. But with the internet now, everything is so fast, like Zeal mentioned, that now it's a very, very this is the birth canal, right?
Well,
And I think literally 2026 into 27 is a massive birth canal that they're getting through, and that's why they've cashed in their big chips.
we'll see that ties in as well with what we saw with the advent of the printing press, right? This mass outgrowth of not really just information but of opinions, right? And right, man, these opinions exploded, and then eventually, what did you get? You got the 30 Years' War, where about a third of Europe, effectively murdered itself in a frenzy, right? Because of this hyper explosion of information. It wasn't a gradual thing; it just came about, right? And then difference came about. A similar thing, by the way, is occurring with the sort of social commentators on YouTube and such, and that's leading to the same sort of violence and political violence and the angst, the divisions between people. But they're absolutely on a sort of formulaic time frame. Absolutely, spot on, man, spot on. Right, dude. Thank you very much for the discussion. That was awesome. Everyone else has gone, but we are the last ones standing.
Last man standing. Yeah, at least this time.
Exactly, man.
Yeah, but it was a great discussion, man. Yeah, sorry I got to run, but good talk.
No, it's all right, bro. Right, take it easy, man. Have a good one.
You
Bye.
too. Take care.